Hello and welcome to the Morningstar series, Why Should I Invest With You? I'm Emma Wall and I'm joined by Colin McLean, manager of the SVM UK Growth Fund. Hello, Colin.
Hello.
So despite your fund and indeed the FTSE doing very well over the last 12 months, you remain bullish on UK equities. Why is that?
I think we've had quite a boost from this devaluation. I think also the UK has a lot of stocks that differ a bit from others globally. So there's a lot of companies that we see some self-improvement, there's some self-help going on with, and the background's not a bad one for them at all.
And differently from the UK, other UK equity managers and indeed the FTSE, you describe your hunting ground as that mid and smaller company sphere. Why do you enjoy investing in those types of companies versus those sort of multi-billion pound conglomerates?
I think the very biggest FTSE companies, or the top half of the market, are very driven by global trends, and they're very widely researched too, so it's much harder to add value with those. They also suffer some of this global disinflation pattern. There's some bad stuff going on globally that they're fighting against. Once you come away from that, you start in the lower half of the FTSE, the upper half of the mid 250, to find a lot more interesting companies where management can make a difference. You can meet management and you can find what age they've got, and they're not so widely researched. They start to attract more research as they move up. So that's a really interesting area to pick stocks in.
And those stocks that are larger, however, have benefited from sterling devaluation. How much does that play into your investment process, the idea of currency and what it's worth against the world?
We do maintain a balance in portfolios. So portfolios have a growth and value balance. And while there's some sectors, I think longer term, we're not sure whether we can see growth, say, in commodities. We do maintain companies that are exposed in that area. So we have some balance that benefits from that. But there's also some companies further down, say ones like Ashtead with lots of US earnings. So we do have some mid-cap and some of the smaller FTSE companies that have been able, with a lot of non-sterling earnings, to come through this quite well.
And of course, we've had the budget this week, and the Chancellor opened his speech with very positive talk on the UK economy. His forecasts were better than expected growth for this year, slightly downgraded for a few years, and then back up to 2% for 2020 and 2021. How much does domestic growth impact your decision-making as a fund manager?
I think it has an impact, particularly in a lot of the UK mid-caps, say these consumer cyclicals, discretionary businesses. But the concern I think we have much more is what happens in real wages. And you can go through periods where if inflation does pick up towards 3% over this year and next, and wages are a lot tighter, we'll see a little bit more of a squeeze happening there, and that starts to affect some of the media, retail and other businesses. So we're more exposed to real earnings growth than perhaps to economic growth. And I think we're going to see a couple of subdued years there. It's been boosted more recently by consumer credit, and that's not sustainable. And
other than inflation, are there any sort of negative points on the horizon for you as a UK equity manager?
I think there's concern, not so much about the current European elections, but I think there's still forces playing out against the euro in the medium term. I think it's going to be quite difficult to hold that part of Europe together. And so I think that's a concern. But Europe is picking up in growth, so that's satisfactory. In China, debt has risen quite a lot, so they've really boosted growth, particularly over the last year, with an awful lot of borrowing, and that's unsustainable too. So that's much further out in the horizon, but I think the global economy is looking this year and next at quite reasonable pickup.
Colin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is Emma Wall from Morningstar. Thank you for watching.